Welcome to Stories Pulse, where every story brings a new perspective on life. If you're a fan of heartwarming tales, unexpected twists, and inspiring journeys, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. If you enjoy this story, give it a thumbs up, share it with friends who love meaningful content, and don't forget to drop a comment below. We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for tuning in to Stories Pulse. Let's dive into another unforgettable tale. Ethan Ross stood at the entrance of his restaurant, watching the last of his staff leave for the night. He had barely any customers left these days. His once thriving restaurant, the Gilded Fork, had fallen into ruin. Bills piled up on his desk, debt collectors called relentlessly, and every day felt like a ticking clock toward inevitable bankruptcy. Tonight it felt more real than ever. His heart heavy with defeat, he locked the front door and walked back into the empty dining hall. The once bustling room was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Plates of untouched, unsold food sat on counters, waiting to be tossed away. It had been another day of nearly no business, just a single table of 2 patrons. The rest of the meals were cold remnants of what was supposed to be a grand service. Just as he was about to dispose of the food, a soft knock came from the back door, the one near the alley. Startled, he approached it cautiously. When he opened it, a frail old woman stood there, shivering in the cold. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her hands trembled as she pulled a ragged shawl tighter around her thin frame. "Sir, please," she said, her voice quavering with exhaustion and hunger. "I haven't eaten in days. Do you have anything to spare?" Ethan's first instinct was to turn her away, not because he didn't want to help, but because he felt like a failure. He could hardly feed himself, let alone others. But then he looked at her, her hollow cheeks, her thin fingers grasping at the edges of the shawl, and something in him shifted. "Wait here," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. The owner of a bankrupt restaurant allowed a beggar woman to take the leftover food to her home. He broke into tears, realizing how much he too had changed. Ethan hadn't always been this way. The Gilded Fork had once been the talk of the town. Just a few years ago, his restaurant was celebrated for its creative dishes, fine dining experience, and impeccable service. There had been nights when reservations were booked months in advance, when celebrities and food critics fought for a seat at one of his tables. He had worked hard to build it from the ground up, investing every ounce of his passion and talent into creating a place where people could experience the art of food. But slowly, things began to change. A large corporate chain opened down the street, offering cheaper meals with fancy marketing and aggressive advertising. Business at the Gilded Fork started to dwindle. Ethan tried everything: new menus, discount nights, partnering with delivery services, but nothing worked. The restaurant industry had become brutal, and he found himself sinking deeper into debt. His dreams were slipping through his fingers like sand, and no matter how hard he tried to hold on, it seemed impossible to stop. Then there were the personal tragedies. His father, once his biggest supporter, passed away unexpectedly, leaving Ethan emotionally shattered. His relationship with his fiancée crumbled under the pressure of the restaurant's failure, and she left, taking with her the last bit of hope Ethan had. Now his once grand vision of the future had turned into a nightmare. The restaurant, his life's work, was nothing more than a sinking ship. Ethan returned to the back door, carrying a tray with the leftover food that hadn't been served. There were slices of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and even a few rolls of fresh bread. He handed the tray to the woman. "This is all I have left tonight," he said. "You can take it." Her eyes widened with gratitude, but she did not immediately devour the food. Instead, she smiled at him, a soft and knowing smile, and nodded. "Thank you, sir," she said. "You've done more than you realize." The woman took the tray and disappeared into the cold night, leaving Ethan to return to the empty restaurant, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief that he had helped someone, but also the deepening weight of his own failure. The next few days were worse. Customers stopped coming entirely, and Ethan knew the end was near. He spent his nights alone in the kitchen, staring at the blank reservation book and thinking about what he would do after the restaurant closed. Then one evening, just as he was about to close for the night, the beggar woman returned. Ethan, surprised to see her again, stepped outside to meet her. She held a small basket in her hands covered with a checkered cloth. "I came to bring you something in return," she said, offering him the basket. Ethan was taken aback. "You didn't have to do that. I don't need anything in return." But the woman insisted, her eyes gleaming with an odd intensity. "Please, just take it." Reluctantly, he accepted the basket. When he lifted the cloth, he saw several perfectly wrapped pieces of homemade bread, along with a small jar of honey. The aroma was inviting, and something about the offering felt oddly familiar, almost comforting. This is wonderful," Ethan said, surprised by the quality. "Did you make this?" The woman smiled, but there was a hint of mystery in her eyes. "It's a gift, just like the food you gave me. But you'll see, this is more than it seems." With that cryptic comment, she left again, disappearing into the shadows of the alleyway. Ethan brought the basket inside, unsure of what to make of it. He took a slice of the bread and tasted it. It was soft, warm, and sweet, the kind of bread he hadn't tasted in years, reminiscent of something from his childhood. The flavors brought back a flood of memories, and for a moment, he forgot about the financial ruin he was facing. The warmth of the bread seemed to soothe his soul in a way nothing else had in a long time. That night, as he closed up, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the beggar woman. Who was she? How could she make bread this perfect when she seemed to have nothing? And why did she look at him with such strange intensity? Over the next few days, Ethan found himself waiting for her return. He began preparing extra meals, hoping to give her something more each time. And each night she would come, collect the food, and leave him with something small in return. A jar of jam, a hand-woven cloth, or a bundle of fresh herbs. Her gifts, while simple, were always remarkable in quality, and each one brought a sense of peace to Ethan's otherwise chaotic life. One evening, after weeks of this strange exchange, Ethan decided to follow her. Something about the woman's presence haunted him. There was something she wasn't telling him, something he needed to know. He watched as she took the leftover food and disappeared down the alley, as she always did. But this time, instead of going back into the restaurant, he slipped out after her, keeping his distance. The woman walked through the streets, winding through dark alleys and empty lanes, until she reached the outskirts of town. Ethan followed her to a dilapidated building, hidden from sight by overgrown vines and crumbling walls. She slipped inside, and Ethan, hesitating for just a moment, followed her in. What he saw when he stepped inside stopped him cold. The building, though crumbling on the outside, was transformed inside. Candles lit the room in a soft, golden glow, casting shadows over the walls adorned with tapestries and handmade trinkets. But it wasn't the decor that caught his attention. It was the people. Dozens of people sat around a long, makeshift table, eating and laughing. They were poor, just like the beggar woman, dressed in ragged clothes, faces worn with hardship. But there was a sense of joy, of community, that Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. In the center of it all, the beggar woman stood, serving them the food he had given her. Ethan's heart ached as he realized the truth. She hadn't been taking the food for herself. She had been sharing it with others, feeding the homeless and hungry who lived in the shadows of the city. His legs felt weak, and tears welled up in his eyes as he took in the scene. All this time, he had thought he was the one giving, the one helping her. But in reality, she had been helping him, showing him that even in the darkest times, kindness and generosity could still thrive. The beggar woman saw him standing in the doorway and approached him with a gentle smile. "You've done more than you know, Ethan," she said softly. "You've given us hope, and for that, we are grateful." Ethan felt something break inside him. Years of stress, fear, and failure melted away in that moment. He realized that success wasn't just about money or fame. It was about the impact he had on others. His restaurant may have been failing financially, but through his small acts of kindness, he had found something far more meaningful. From that night on, Ethan made a decision. He kept the Gilded Fork open, not as a fine dining restaurant, but as a community kitchen where anyone could come and eat, regardless of their ability to pay. Word spread quickly, and soon the restaurant became a beacon of hope for the city's most vulnerable. He had found his purpose again, not in wealth or success, but in the simple act of feeding those in need. And in doing so, He had saved not only his restaurant but his soul.